All right, I think we're starting. So welcome everybody. And it looks like we've got a really big lineup, or we've got a big following today. So about 400 people have joined us, which is pretty impressive. And hopefully it's because they really want to hear about this contentious issue, one of the most contentious issues we have, which is about invasive species. Sorry, getting all these text messages pop up. Anyway, I'll keep going. One of the most contentious issues we've got, which is cats. Cats cause big impacts in Australia. So the feature of today is, for today's webinar, is the author, John Reid, and he wrote this book, Among the Pigeons. So it comes off the back of years of work controlling cats here in Australia and traveling the world, consulting cat experts. So welcome and thanks for being with us, John Reid.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm talking to you from Bungala country in Eyre Peninsula, South Australia.
Thank you, John. All right. And also joining us as part of the panel, we've got our ambassador and former Tasmanian Senator, Christine Milne. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks, Andrew. And I'm joining you from Tasmania, from the Palawa country.
Excellent. All right. And we've also got on the panel biologist and author, Tim Lowe. He's one of our co-founders. So welcome, Tim. Actually, we haven't got Tim right now. We've got some technical issues. So we're going to have Tim joining us in a few minutes, I hope. All goes well. So I'm the Invasive Species Council CEO, and I'm coming to you from Durrock and Gundungurra land, just west of Sydney. So it's just a great pleasure to be able to bring you John Reid and to be able to talk about his book, Among the Pigeons. And I've had lots of interactions with John over the years. He's been joining many of the meetings of the National Feral Cat Task Force. But John's a deep thinker. He's not only an ecologist, but he's also an innovator and inventor. And he's got a restless mind. This is his fourth book that he's written. But I reckon I've read one of the other ones, but it's a really entertaining, easy to read book, but full of lots of information about cats. And I've actually learned more about cats than I expected to. It's just a great book to read. So just a reminder, this is a Q&A as well as hearing from our panelists and from John. So feel free to ask your questions when they come up using the Q&A tab down the bottom. Don't use the chat function, just the Q&A function. And then we'll gather those up and we'll intersperse them as we go. So please make sure you ask your questions. So I'm going to set off the first questions with John. John, why exactly did you write Among the Pigeons?
I was looking for something to do with 10 years of my life, Andrew. So yeah, it was a long process, but you mentioned that cats are a very contentious issue. They're also very polarizing. And yeah, most people you speak to, or many people, have very black and white views on cats. Either, a cat can do no wrong, or the only good cat's a flat cat. And but yeah, it's really cats are far more varied than that. Their impacts and their benefits are far more varied. There's a lot of nuance around cats, and I guess I was trying to capture that nuance with my book, Among the Pigeons: Why Our Cats Belong Indoors. And yeah, really sort of writing it for the people that are looking for tabbies and tortoiseshells, not just the black and white aspects of cats. So yeah, just I guess explaining some of the information, some of the new scientific data, some of the perceptions, some of the trials in how to manage cats and some of their impacts around the world. So yeah, that was my motivation for writing it.
Right. So yeah, Christine, what do you think about cats, whether they're feral or domestic?
So I was brought up on a dairy farm in northwest Tasmania, but during my life as an environmentalist, huge impact of cats on native birds and wildlife. And so I've been taking a particular interest in what happens when you eradicate. And there's one good example in Tasmania with Tasman Island, where a local business person put quite a lot of money into a program with the state government because there were 60 to 65 feral cats there, and they were destroying 60,000 fairy prions a year, and they were living on grasshoppers in the wintertime to survive. And so they eradicated the cats from Tasman Island and demonstrated what could be done if the community got behind it. And we've got a similar effort happening now on Bruny Island, which was one of the 10 programs the Commonwealth funded for offshore islands. So horrified by the extent of feral cats in Tasmania, for example, university put out 600 cameras on 1,300 sites, and we've got cats, and 90% of those cameras and sites recorded feral cats. So we have a big problem with feral cats, and of course they're contributing to the loss of birds and reptiles and small mammals in Tasmania, and of course around the country. So I'm pretty keen to hear what John has to say about how to best effectively deal with this problem.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. The amount of cats were spotted on those camera traps. Just wanted to really look at another aspect that was quite frightening, if you like, from John's book. I've certainly heard about it beforehand, but John really explains it well. So, John, it seems that cats are not just clever hunters; they have another tool in their arsenal. So tell us about how toxoplasmosis adds to the cat's destructiveness.
Right. So toxo is a parasite. It's a parasite that requires the cat's digestive system to breed in. So it's totally reliant upon the cat. And what it does, it's a tiny microscopic little parasite, and researchers have found that it actually changes the behavior of cat prey. So it actually makes mice and rats that are naturally scared of cats. It changes that aversion to cats to actually making attracted to cats, and they will actually find that mice and rats will actually seek out cat urine and go towards it rather than running away from it. So that's it. Quite possibly evolved that it made those animals easier to prey on, and we've found in Australia that even some of our bandicoots and other small mammals become disorientated, and they're wandering around the middle of the day. They make easier targets for cats. So the virus actually, or the little parasite actually affects the brain and the mental capacity of the cat. And it not only does it do that, but it actually affects humans as well. So most of us know that, or have known, when women are pregnant, there's a risk of toxoplasmosis causing birth defects and congenital heart defects and eye issues. But in recent years, the connection between toxo and mental health disorders has been discovered and investigated around the world. And there's quite a range of mental health disorders, including Alzheimer's and epilepsy and schizophrenia, that are often related to, maybe 20-25% of these cases are related to toxoplasmosis, and it's as a chronic infection. So yeah, the costs to our public in terms of our mental health, but also the medical budget. So yeah, a recent study that Sarah Legg put together with some others found that the annual cost to the Australian health budget of cat-related diseases, particularly toxoplasmosis, is around $8 billion a year. So it's just incredible cost and concern to us. And just to remind you that toxoplasmosis is only spread by oocysts, the tiny little seeds that are in cat feces. These oocysts can occur in densities of up to 1,000 per square metre of soil, particularly around sand pits and places where cats are likely to defecate. And so they represent a huge risk to our wildlife and to our human health.
That's extraordinary. I hope I haven't got toxoplasmosis myself. It's just one of those things that keeps surprising you. So Tim, welcome. Thanks for joining us and persevering with the technical challenges.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, good. We might come to you in a minute, Tim, but we'll just keep sort of just trying to think a bit more about toxoplasmosis and really what it means. Christine, given its sort of the severe impacts for humans, do you think this is an opportunity for, I think thinking about how how cats can spread this disease and human health?
Yes, I was in the Senate for a decade, and I can tell you that it was never raised in the context of the health budget that $8 billion or a figure like that was being spent on dealing with these diseases, particularly toxoplasmosis, but the others in relation to cats. And I really think the public health message has been lost. I agree with you. Certainly in terms of pregnancy, people understand the problem and people are careful, but the rest of the time, just no idea. And families with young children and sandpits have no idea for the most part. And so I think there's an enormous opportunity to work with the medical professionals in order to raise the public profile of the health impacts of domestic and feral cats. I seriously just don't think the community has any idea. And when I read your book, I was just horrified and kept thinking, why on earth would people have cats given all of these diseases? And like Andrew, I thought, I wonder if I've got it. And as you say, those odd behaviours of, knowing you shouldn't do something but doing it anyway, you think, gosh, how many of us have been impacted already? So I think doing more public awareness, but particularly through public health, that was how we changed the message on tobacco. And it certainly ought to be how we should change the message on cats. So I think it is a big opportunity in addressing the public awareness of the impacts of feral cats, or cats generally, to actually work with Doctors for the Environment, but also work with the medical associations to lift the profile of the cost and the human impacts as well as the wildlife impacts.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Great. All right. Well, just reminding people, one or two people are putting comments in the chats. If you've got a question to ask, make sure it goes in the Q&A box down the bottom, not the chat box, so that we can assemble those and ask them as we go.
Andrew, I might just jump in there to respond to a couple of things you've just mentioned. One is that, Christine just said, why would anyone have cats, with the risk of toxo? If cats are kept indoors and they're not perpetuating the food chain, so that they need to pick up oocysts from the environment, from their prey, and then they develop in the gut. If cats are kept indoors and all cats were kept indoors, toxoplasmosis would die out in Australia pretty well. So the risks and threat of toxo doesn't mean we can't have any cats. It just means that we can't have free-ranging cats, or we should try and minimise the free-ranging cats. And you both, I grinned a bit when you both questioned whether you might have been exposed to toxoplasmosis. We don't know what the exact figures are in Australia, but around the world, those figures are sort of somewhere between 30 and 60% of adults have been exposed to toxo. Not all of those go on and develop the mental health issues. So it might only be, it's only a percentage of them. But just to let you know that most of us, in some places, most of us, especially if we've worked in gardens or sand pits, had pet cats, worked with feral cats, I'll put my hand up in that. We probably of this panel, 3 of the 4 of us have had toxoplasmosis or been exposed to it.
Yeah, good. And I just had a couple of questions come through already. Janet Wheeler says, can cats be tested for toxo? And also another question about whether any miscarriages can be caused by toxoplasmosis. John, do you have any answers, simple answers for that?
Not the second one. No, you need to speak to a medical doctor on that. And yes, all animals can be tested. We can be tested. Cats can and wildlife can. It's not done very often, but yeah, it can be done.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, I'll just maybe bring Tim Lowe, our co-founder, into the conversation. Good morning or good afternoon, Tim. Sorry for the technical glitches there. Good to see you here.
Yeah, no, great to be here.
So, Tim, I wanted to just maybe ask a question for you. your thinking around cats has changed, because I note that when you wrote Feral Future back in 1999, you actually questioned the evidence of cats and their role in the extinctions. Have you changed your mind since then? What do you think about the impacts of cats?
Yeah, there's been a lot of evidence accumulate since then. I mean, a couple of the issues that influenced my thinking then was that if you looked at Tasmania, that was the one state where you hadn't had any extinctions that could be attributed to predators. So you'd lost the thylacine, which was obviously human hunting and possibly pathogens, but all of the smaller mammals that have gone virtually extinct on the mainland, like the eastern bar bandicoot, Tasmanian bettong, the Tasmanian pademelon, and eastern quolls that all survived in Tasmania, which had no foxes. You also had lots of cats. You also had the situation in southwestern Australia where they had the Western Shield baiting program it was killing foxes. Cats weren't taking the baits. But despite that selective killing of foxes, not cats, you had this huge return of numbats, brush-tailed bettongs, eastern quolls, red-tailed phascogales. So those were two fairly strong lines of evidence implicating cats and implicating foxes and separating out cats. And what's been really interesting since then is that, like I visited Dryandra Forest, a major refuge for southwest Australian mammals, and I saw a brush-tailed bettong around near my tent at night. And that period, they were being delisted. They'd gone from, I think, vulnerable, and they decided, well, we've got lots of them now. And then there was this huge reversal. And now I've been back to that campground, and you don't see bettongs there at all. They've gone back onto the endangered listing because cats have greatly increased. Camera trapping has shown that. So for some reason, there was this delay in cat predation turning up there. And in Tasmania, the Tasmanian devil cancer, you now have cats emerging as serious predators of bettongs. And so it looked like devils were suppressing cats. And so, there's a whole series of bits of evidence that make the evidence against cats much, much stronger.
Thanks, Tim. All right, I might just sort of switch back to John's book again and some of the other things he's raised, but it does link a bit with the diseases spread by cats. John, when I read your book, I sort of was surprised by hearing about how cats impact on some of the native cats in regions around the world, cats which aren't the same as the domestic cat. Do you want to talk a bit about how dire the situation is for our wild cats and what impact the domestic cat, if you like, are having on that?
Sure. There's a couple of ways that's happening. Probably the most obvious way is by hybridization and competition. So some of the rare native cats around, there's some rare small native felines in Africa and Europe and Asia. The Scottish wildcat is one classic example. They're very difficult to distinguish from pet cats, and in fact, often genetic analysis is required to work out the difference between a domestic cat and one of Scotland's rarest animals. But the issue there is that domestic cats can breed several times a year and have large litters, and they're designed, they evolved in the desert where resources were scarce, and when there were lots of food around, they bred really quickly, and hence that's sort of followed through. And now the more domestic cats are fed, the more often they come into estrus, the more kittens they can have. Whereas wild cats are generally have co-evolved with the resources in their environment, and they only breed once a year, and they might only have a couple of kittens. So when you get domestic, feral or stray domestic cats with some of these native wildcats, they outbreed them and they flood their genetics and hybridize, and we're losing a lot of their rare mammals that way, or rare cats that way. And the other way it's happening is impacts to even larger native cats, like lynx and cougars and some of the Asian cats through diseases that are spread by domestic cats. So these are feline-specific diseases like feline leukemia and feline immunodeficiency disease, and things that are spread from domestic cats to these wild cats. The wild cats haven't been exposed to them before, and they don't have an immunity to them, and had some serious declines of some of the native cats that way as well. So I guess we very much focus on the impact of feral cats and straying domestic cats on their predation on wildlife here in Australia, but in other parts of the world, they have a big impact on native felines as well.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, that's certainly something I didn't really appreciate until I read your book. Now, quite a few questions are coming in. We're talking about domestic cats and their impact. So I might just quickly switch to that. But I thought there was a really good example in your book, John, that really, I think, drives home this point, not only about the impacts of domestic cats, but also about people's efforts to try to control cats, and the reluctance to actually kill cats as part of those control efforts. So tell me, John, about Michael the cat, and can he really take out a booby, a 1 kilogram bird that's got a 1.5 meter wingspan?
Sure. So the story about Michael was one of the most bizarre stories on cats that I collected traveling around. So there was some Japanese ornithologists working on the Ogasawara Islands, which are about 1,000 kilometers from Tokyo, out in the Pacific. And they were losing, they were finding dead birds, great big boobies, as you said, and couldn't work out what the cause was. They installed some cameras there, and they found this ginger cat dragging a recently killed booby past, the carcasses of some other ones that were there. They then, established that, this monster feral cat had learned how to take down these really large birds. And they set about a program to remove the feral cats from these islands. So it was the main island there was Hahajima Island. But being Japanese, they're very attached to their cats, and they weren't prepared just to euthanize the cats, using techniques that are used sort of around the world to eradicate cats from islands where they're having huge impacts on seabirds, like Christine mentioned, from Tasmania. So sort of formed a partnership with some vets based in Tokyo, and they actually caught Michael and some other cats. They transported him 1,000 kilometers to Tokyo, and then in this veterinary hospital, gradually reformed this really badass cat into a pet, and rehomed him, and he's now sort of like I guess a mascot at that hospital, and the other cats that came off the island too, at enormous expense and enormous amount of time, a couple of years to train them to adapt to an indoor lifestyle. So I guess that story told me a few things. It was quite ironic that so much money and effort was put into, I guess, looking after and rehoming these cats, these feral cats from this remote island, when there was, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of stray cats, just outside in Tokyo that weren't afforded such luxuries. But also, it did demonstrate, and there are several examples I quote from around the world, where people have got feral cats, really stray cats, or domestic cats that have been free roaming all their lives, and have brought them inside and taught them to have perfectly comfortable and valuable lives inside. So it is possible. You get lots of stories. Lots of people, lots of cat owners will say that a cat's meant to be outside, and it's meant to live outside. You shouldn't bring them inside. It's cruel, but a lot of the animal welfare groups are saying that no, that's not the truth at all. Free-ranging cats are exposed to all sorts of diseases and fighting and traffic accidents and other traumas, and it's much better for the cat to be kept indoors and entertained and trained to live indoors. So that was the story of Michael.
Yeah, gosh. Right. Well, talking about domestic cats, we know that the laws in Australia are quite variable depending which state you're in. But it's not just the laws, it's also people's attitudes to whether it's a good idea to keep your cat indoors, your domestic cat indoors or not. Christine, why do you think people are so resistant to either, I guess you've got a choice here, you either keep your cat indoors or you get another pet? Why do you think people are so resistant to that? And even, I guess, why are governments resistant to acting on this?
First of all, I think it's a cultural issue in Australia. People have had cats for so long. It's just part of community to have a cat or a dog. So that has just been the way people have been brought up. People have accepted that with dogs, you have to register them and you can't just let them roam on the streets, but they haven't accepted that yet with cats. And I think that's an interesting thing. In fact, most people have never even considered that idea that why do you have to keep your dogs off the street, but you can let your cat be on the street? So that's even at that level. So at public policy level, people really have not engaged this idea that their private right to a cat ought to be outweighed by the public interest in terms of wildlife and in fact in terms of the welfare of the animal itself. As John just said, a lot of wild roaming cats are starving, run over, and end up having pretty miserable lives. But I do think it's a cultural thing. In Tasmania, they introduced a cat strategy in 2017, which was for 5 years, which was supposed to be raising public awareness in Tasmania about the need to stop cats roaming, keep cats indoors. As far as I can see, apart from the launch of the strategy, nothing has ever happened. Earlier this year, a new regulation came in Tasmania saying that if you own a cat that's over 4 months old, it has to be desexed, it has to be microchipped. But again, there's no compliance. And unless a person takes a cat to the vet, how would anyone know whether that had actually been done? So I think there needs to be a really significant exercise in talking to the public about the impact of the cats on wildlife and aligning it really with the same issue as smoking. People thought they used to be able to smoke wherever they like, regardless of the public interest and the impact on anyone else. Now they accept that they can't. And it's going to have to be the same with cats. But politicians, I can tell you, are terrified of actually enforcing regulations. The laws are there, but they're terrified of enforcing them because it's unpopular. So that is the issue. At some point, we have to switch. The thing has to flip for it being popular to actually control cats and to enforce keeping them inside as opposed to not doing so. And I think the ACT is quite interesting in moving in that direction now, having got a policy of saying, right, well, you're going to have your cats have to stay inside. But I notice they also have the trap, the desex and the release still in the ACT, which seems inconsistent with that. But I suppose their idea is to bring in the one regulation to keep them off the streets and then ultimately deal with those animals that are in groups, clusters or whatever around the ACT.
Yeah, gosh, trap, neuter, release is definitely a very controversial topic. John, you looked at that in your book. Do you want to just quickly touch on that just to really help us understand what's going on and what you think of that method as a method for dealing with the stray cats out in the community in urban areas?
Trap, neuter, release is a very appealing method for people who don't want to see any animals die. It doesn't work though. Unfortunately, it doesn't work, and it's really, I guess, promoted through social media. It was originated in the United States mainly, and people feeding pet cats with the belief that if they desex the cats, those desexed cats that were in that feeding zone would keep non-desexed cats away from the food and keep non-desexed cats away from mating. Neither of them work. Cats, they're erroneously called colonies. Cats don't form colonies. Cats don't defend resources and they don't defend mates. So the more food you put out there, the more cats you'll end up getting. And so there's been lots of research done around the world showing that for trap, neuter, release to work effectively, you need to neuter at least 80% of the cats, and you have to stop all immigration, and you have to stop feeding and people dumping more cats there, and it just hasn't worked anywhere. And yeah, it won't work in Australia either. So yeah, it's quite definitive results, and it is a bit concerning that some organizations, often sponsored by big pet food companies, are really promoting the trial of trap neuter release. But all the science and all the evidence shows that it doesn't work. And in fact, even groups like PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, say that releasing neutered cats back on the street is one of the cruelest things you can do. If you can't rehome them. And so I honestly believe that any cat the first option should be to rehome it, find it a loving home where it's indoors and not causing any problems. If you can't rehome it, then it should be euthanized as quickly and as ethically as possible.
Thanks, John. Just for the people that have just joined us after our introduction, we're talking about this book, Among the Pigeons, and a few of our questionnaires asked how to get hold of it. In the chat, there's a few links, but it's pretty widely available. It's published by Wakefield Press, and we've got John Reid, the author, ecologist, cat lover, talking with us here with our panelist, Christine Milne, the Invasive Species Council ambassador, and Tim Lowe, who's also an author in his own right, ecologist and co-founder of the Invasive Species Council. I want to just come back to the feral cats in Australia, those ones far away from the urban areas. Tim, you told me about spending some time in the northern Kimberley in the Artesian Range, where foxes haven't arrived and there's very few, if not no cats there. What was that like? What was the difference between that area and places where these foxes and cats are?
It was just mind-boggling, really. It was just overwhelming. So I was there. It was the Australian Wildlife Conservancy have it as one of their reserves, and I was there for their annual trapping program in November. So we put out cage traps and go and check them the next morning, and virtually every single one would either have a native mammal inside or it had been triggered by a mammal. I mean, I've done lots of mammal surveys around Australia. I've never seen anything like that. There was one trap. This was like 25 metres from the kitchen where we were eating every night. I went there just after dusk and there was a Kimberley rock rat inside. So we let that go. A couple of hours later, there was something else in it. It was a quoll, a northern quoll was inside. So we let that go. And I came back early the next morning and there was a scaly-tailed possum inside. I mean, it was just staggering. 3 really high-quality species of mammal inside one trap in one night. And the landscape around this station where we were, it was really pretty scrappy country. I mean, it was little runty trees, it was all rocks, it was bleached, it was hot. It wasn't anything. I mean, just my own impression of looking at it would be that you would not expect many mammals there at all. And I'm thinking, is this what Australia was like 200 years ago? And I think, yeah, this is what Australia was like 200 years ago.
Yeah, I think we've almost forgotten what it was like, haven't we? Because they've been here for so long. So maybe thinking about control methods, John, you've been experimenting with different control methods, and in places, I think what really impressed me was your first encounter with a very special parrot. So tell me about that parrot and the attempts to control cats in its habitat.
Okay, I might just actually follow on from Tim's comments too about the Northern Kimberleys and the diversity of wildlife there. We find exactly the same thing with the increasing number of cat-free safe havens around Australia. So yeah, my background picture is a feral-proof fence around my scrub block on Eyre Peninsula, but there's I've been involved with them for 30 odd years since we established our recovery in the desert, and there's lots of other reserves now, and in all of them the abundance and diversity of small mammals, ground nesting birds has just increased amazingly. Dramatic change in in the abundance of these animals, including some of our rarest species, because we've removed cats and foxes. And the same thing happened too when calicivirus went through the desert in the mid 1990s. All of a sudden, rabbits, cats, and fox numbers crashed, and a lot of our native animals rebounded. So it's really amazing what can happen if we do manage our cats and manage our cat predation. You were introducing, my little story on when I went out looking for the night parrot, and in outback Queensland when they'd first been discovered, and it was pretty quickly recognised that feral cats were a key threat to night parrots. And because they'd only just been rediscovered, we only knew of a handful of birds anywhere in the world. There was some attempts to manage the feral cats out there, and it did present some problems because the typical techniques that we used, spotlight shooting, they hadn't seen any cats, even though cats had been detected on cameras. And the managers there were very, very reluctant to use baits because dingoes play a really important role in keeping fox numbers and also to a certain extent cat numbers down in some areas. And because dingoes are susceptible to baits, they're very reluctant to do that. So, the night parrot spot was one of the first places that we trialled the Felixa device, which I sort of designed and have been testing for the last 14 years. That delivers measured doses of toxin to the fur of cats, but not wildlife as they go past, and then the cats groom that off and ingest the poison that way. So it was also one of the most amazing experiences of my life, I must add, sitting on top of a rocky hill just after dark, listening so intently, and finally hearing the call of a night parrot, which I'd been sort of listening for, not really knowing what I was listening for, but for 30 years camping out bush, and to finally hear it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had.
Yeah, thanks. Excellent. And just with the Invasive Species Council's working with you now to work out how to get more of the felixes into the hands of people on the ground. So really look forward to doing that as part of trying to reduce the impacts. Tim, do you have anything to say about whether a smart trap like the Felixa will make a difference to cat control?
Well, I mean, obviously we certainly hope it will. I mean, it's just so important to pursue options for dealing with cats. So I guess there's so much at stake. We've got to hope that it does work.
Yeah, and Christine, I mean, this is an opportunity for government, I guess, to sort of think about how to get more tools into the hands of land managers. What do you think we could be doing on that front?
Well, I think it is a big opportunity. The Commonwealth spent a lot of money on the 10 offshore islands that were part of a strategy, I think, announced 10 years ago. So that's coming into the end of that strategy. They've put a lot of money into it. So facilitating the rollout of the Felixa to several of those islands for a start would be extremely helpful. I think New Zealand has shown us that you get the offshore islands under control, then you come back for your headlands and so on, and you can move in from there. And I think it would be, especially when you compare it with the health budget, that's what I mean about the politics of it. People will say, oh no, that's too much money to be spending over there on threatened species or environment programs. But when you point out that you're actually spending 8 billion on the health budget as a result of cats and impacts on humans and so on in urban and peri-urban areas and rural areas, it's well worth thinking about how much you're spending on feral cats compared with what you're spending on the consequences of feral cats, and also the recovery plans for threatened species, although a lot of those have been dropped and have just been reinstated, but nevertheless billions have to be spent in this decade of ecosystem restoration. So I think that it needs to be looked at holistically, but nevertheless I think rolling them out is really important. One thing I did want to ask John in relation to the Felixa is just the refinement in terms of identifying the species, the feral cat, as opposed to other species, and just how long that's taken to get it right so that you get positive strikes rather than just with passing Tasmanian devils or passing quolls, for example.
Right. Just before I answer that, I should also point out that the Commonwealth have invested some money in getting Felixes out to some of those priority islands. So there've been Felixes on Groote Island, Christmas Island, Kangaroo Island, and Three Hummocks Island, and getting some really pleasing results out there as well. And I should also just say that Felixes are now being developed by an independent organisation or two organisations, both come under the Thylation banner. And being a Tasmanian, Christine would understand that the origin of the Thylation name is what we're trying to do is mimic the role of the thylacine or Thylacca, the marsupial lion, in being a top order predator, to limit the numbers of cats and foxes in Australia. And so the Felix are not baiting, not anything else is going to eradicate cats from Australia. They're all there's a whole range of different tools. So Thylation is relying on philanthropic funds mainly and some investment and to develop some tools, so proactive tools for managing conservation projects in Australia. You asked how long it's taken to perfect. Nothing's ever perfect, but the Felixes are working pretty well at the moment. They've been using four LiDAR sensors to distinguish wildlife from feral cats by their shape and their speed. But now we're just incorporating an artificial intelligence camera in there as well, which is already showing that it'll dramatically improve the distinction, and so we can be really confident that we are targeting cats and not your koalas and devils and things like that. So that's really important. And I guess we also have the opportunity of incorporating Bluetooth blockers in there, so people can protect their own cat or their young working dogs or pet dogs and still target feral cats and foxes in the environment. So with a combination of tools and some smart engineers, gradually we're improving the tools in our toolbox for managing cats, both out truly feral cats and peri-urban ones as well.
Yeah, thanks, John. Now, quite a few questions are asking about pet cats and how that they can make sure that their cat stays indoors. But I'm sure there's a question lingering for cat owners. There's a common response that we often get is, my cat doesn't kill wildlife, or my cat's well behaved. So I guess it's probably a question for you, John, but I'm interested in what the other panelists think about this. John, what do you say to someone who says that their cat doesn't kill wildlife?
What do I really say? Some cats don't kill wildlife, no question. Many more cats kill wildlife than their owners think they do. And there've been several studies done where GPS collars have been put on cats that are believed to be sleeping all night, and they're actually going out and hunting. We know also that cats will only bring back about a fifth of the animals they kill. When you put cameras on a cat's collar and see what they're actually killing, they don't eat everything they kill, and they definitely don't bring most of the cats back to the house or to the yard where they're seen. So we know that the average pet cat, through a range of studies in Australia, kills about 186 wildlife animals a year. If you put all that together, it comes up to about 390 million animals a year. So there is a lot, a significant impact there, and there's a lot of cats that obviously exceed that average. Just because we know that cats hunt and they sometimes kill wildlife, or they often kill wildlife, doesn't mean we shouldn't have cats. And I'll keep coming back to that. I've got lots of mates who have very loved cats that are kept indoors. Some of them have catios or runs outside where the cat is still enclosed within their yard. And really, that's what I think we should be striving for. I probably differ from Christine a little bit, that I do appreciate that cats have a really important role in society, and we should be smart enough to coexist with cats, but just manage cats in such a way that that they don't cause damage. And Christine did raise the fact that 30 or 40 years ago, dogs used to roam the streets, and we've got used to registering them and containing them. Increasingly, councils around Australia are treating cats exactly the same as dogs. So they have the same registration requirements, the same containment requirements, the same penalties and things like that. And I think that's really the way to go, to raise the profile of cats. So rather than being a Clayton's pet that you have when you don't really want a pet, and you can come and go and look after itself on weekends, they've got to be loved and looked after pets. And the sooner we do that, and the sooner we enforce rules to do so, and really look after our cats, the better for everyone, and especially the better for the cats.
Yeah, I can see a question from Alan Benson. He's just reminded us that New South Wales government's got a new education program with 11 local government areas to keep cats indoors to encourage them. But we looked at the legislation in New South Wales, and local governments can't even put a requirement for cats to be contained on people's property, unlike domestic dogs. So there's certainly some legal barriers there. Tim, do you have any views on whether, I guess thinking about the magnitude or the benefit of keeping domestic cats contained on properties or out of urban bushland areas?
Yeah, look, it's really difficult to say. I mean, I don't like those statistics that just say cats kill this many animals, because, it's also the case that snakes, birds of prey, all our native predators are killing animals as well. And if there wasn't predation, we could be, overflowing with noisy miners and whistlers and all sorts of things. So I think some predation is okay. I think it's a really sticky problem, because I think cats, the social benefit of cats, I think, during COVID, that if you said to people, forget about owning a cat, it's not right, I mean, you really would have people committing suicide and going crazy, mental health problems. I think, I think that the social benefits of cats are enormous. And I say that as someone who's never actually owned a cat myself, but I always pick one up when I get the chance. I also think that what John is saying about having enclosed outdoor runs is really the way to go. That I think in terms of the ethics of pet owning, I think there's enormous suffering goes on with dogs and cats in all countries around the world, that people are not sensitive to their psychological needs, and that I think a majority of cats probably do need to go outside to have a good life, and that the enclosed run is the way to do that. So I think it's about steering society in that direction of saying, look, if you're going to own a cat, part of that should be investing in a kind of enclosed outdoor run, so that they can get that sunshine and grass without being able to engage in too much predation.
Thanks, Tim. Look, we've only got about 5 minutes or so just I'm looking at the questions coming in through the Q&A. Don't put them in the chat, put in the Q&A. Any panelists want to make any comments before I ask a few of the questions in the Q&A?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the impact of the pet food companies. My impression is with pet food companies, they're just like tobacco companies and fossil fuel companies, that of course they prefer the trap, the desex and the release, because it ensures that they have an ongoing market for their product. But of course you've got the sustainability issues for the source of cat food. So you're looking at killing, God knows how many fish go to cat food, not only that, and kangaroos and so on, but also you've got the issues of the disposal of kitty litter and all the waste associated with cats. So I'm just interested in exactly how much of a political problem are the pet food companies in terms of trying to control the numbers of cats.
John, were you the best to answer this? Because I think in your book, I noticed some examples of some of the influence of the pet food companies.
Yeah, just definitely in the United States, it is a big thing. So cat welfare charities sponsored by Big Pet Food are some of the main advocates for trap, neuter, release. And yeah, Christine, I think you've sort of picked it pretty well there. They're sort of feathering their own nest there. The more cats that are out there to feed, the more food that they can get out there, and the waste of food and the fact that cats are obligate carnivores. So unlike dogs and chickens and other animals that eat a lot of can eat a lot of vegetable food, cats really have to have high protein meats, and often that's high trophic level, salmon and mackerel and things like that. When I see that in cat food, it really does make me scratch my head, especially when you get people buying that who are vegetarians or vegans, yet they're buying this really high trophic level fish for their cats. It is something that they definitely should consider.
Thanks, John. I noticed, the Royal Society of Victoria is advertising their next generation biocontrol of invasive species that's coming up in mid-September, 16th of September, but it's going to be looking at things like gene drive and immunocontraception. I mean, obviously, our goal here, if we could, is how do we remove cats from the system in the most humane way? John, you've been trying to, that's why I guess you came up with the Felexa. Are there any other promising things in this area that we can look to for maybe providing that sort of ideal outcome for the cats that are in the landscape?
Yeah, ideal outcome is got inverted commas around that. It depends whether it's ideal for the cat or for the wildlife or for what. So a number of different diseases have been proposed. Most of them aren't terribly humane, and so obviously you have to weigh up the short-term issues for the cat that might be susceptible to some of these diseases. The CRISPR technology, the gene drive technology you're talking about, has enormous potential for a whole range of invasive species. It's still a way off yet, and there are still some ethical issues around that. And also sort of engineering ways of reducing the reproductive rate of cats and making sure it doesn't spread to other wild cats and things like that is also an issue. But I think at the moment, if we concentrate on managing our pet cats, by having registration and containment and enforcing that, and managing the food resources for feral cats, having landowners, whether they're farmers or miners or national parks or town councils, managing the places where cats most likely breed, and that's obviously often rubbish dumps and places like that. If they become net sinks for cats rather than sources of breeding cats, and everyone takes on their own responsibility, I think, at least in the short term, that's likely to have more impact on reducing the impacts of cats.
Yeah, excellent. Look, there's some fantastic questions in the Q&A, and we can't answer all of them. And we're certainly going to, it's given us a bit of pause to think some of the range of questions. I might just finish with a comment from Christine and Tim. So, John, that was a really nice sum up of maybe where we could go. But I'm really interested in where we might be in 50 years' time. What sort of relationship should we be having with the cats, whether they're owned cats or cats out in the wild? Maybe, Tim, you first. What's your hope for cat management in Australia?
Look, I suppose I've said, I'm really concerned about the difficulties. It really is a sticky problem. I think my hope is that 50 years we will see more adaptation by wildlife, so that more native species will be savvy about cat predation, and that this work that's being done at Arid Recovery in trying to train bilbies to deal with these introduced predators. Got to hope that kind of work can really bear fruit. Yes, my hope is with the wildlife learning more so than with people learning.
Great. And Christine, what's your hope?
Well, I'd like to see all our offshore islands having feral cats eradicated. I'd like to see it culturally as it is to wear a seatbelt, that if you own a cat, it must be kept indoors or have a run that is specially dedicated. I think if we could just change the culture to get the cats, stop roaming cats, then we would see a significant shift in Australia, and it's possible. It's possible if governments get behind it.
Excellent. And John, I should give you the last say, given it's your book, and you've done a lot of thinking about this, and I suspect your thinking is probably changing over time, because it's been a couple of years, I think, since your book now. So where would you like to see cat management going in Australia?
Tim raised a really good point about the training native animals to become more adaptable. And yeah, my wife, Catherine Moseby, is actually doing a lot of the research on that. And that's a really key thing. So also we need to recognize that with managing feral cats are just one of the impacts out there in the environment to our wildlife. And if we get our fire regimes and grazing regimes worked out, if there's more resources and more cover, then cats are less efficient hunters. So yeah, we've got to sort of think beyond just looking at cats. As I mentioned before, the management of domestic cats is a huge issue. If we can get cats registered, another thing that Thylation are working on now is some Bluetooth registration tags that will enable pet owners to find their cat if it runs away, and councils to find if they move into cat prohibited areas. I think, yeah, those things should really help. And also, I just realised there's a whole lot of questions there. Can I answer some of these questions after this Zoom, or how can we work that one, Andrew?
Yeah, what we can do is we'll keep this open so you can actually go in. We'll close the formal webinar, and we do keep a copy of the questions, so we should be able to get back to the people. We'll just stay on, John, and see if we can find a technical way to do that. Yeah, because there are some. If you got the time to do a personal response, it'd be fantastic. So we're at the end of the formal webinar now. I mean, the Invasive Species Council, I should probably mention that we're just starting our own cat project, which will focus both on how we can advance some of these ideas we've been talking about for domestic cats. How can we encourage both the rules to be right, but also the education programs across the country to be standardized and rolled out, and also so that there's more effort on the ground, whether we've got more tools like the Felix are out there, but also we know that where they're doing the most damage, we just need more resources put into that. So our cat project, which is starting right now, and our donations are supporting that work, will be a major emphasis of ours for the next few years for sure. So that's it for this latest Aliens Among Us. So I want to thank our three guests, John Reid, the author of Amongst the Pigeons. Thank you, John. Thank you, Christine and Tim, for being our panelists. And thanks for the hundreds that joined this webinar. So we'll be back with another Aliens Among Us in about 2 months from now. So keep an eye on your inbox and our social media feeds for the registration to invite for that. We haven't worked out the subject yet, but I'm sure you'll know pretty soon. And we also have an Aliens Among Us webpage where you can catch up on past recordings. This has been recorded. And we'll also be emailing you a short survey that we'll send you in about a week's time, because we really want to hear your thoughts, because you might actually have some suggestions of other speakers or ways we could do this better. So we're out of time now. So thanks for joining us, and good day.